Welcome to the small supplementary tutorial dealing with medium and your media. Now with this specific tutorial, we've broken down a few different examples of media using past workshop videos. So as with these smaller tutorials accompanying each unit, you'll see that there's broken into segments, and so it's little portions, excerpts from different past workshops that is relevant to what we're dealing with for this specific unit. And also within this unit, you're going to see that we've touched on a few different choices for media, but we are not touching on digital yet. That's coming down the road a little bit. In the next section, we'll break down more into using the various different types of media you can choose, and digital will be looked at more closely. Those wanting to use a tablet or a computer to digitally create your artwork or your sequential narrative that way. So in this specific tutorial, we're dealing with pastels, oil pastels. We're dealing with, of course, pencil, ink, watercolor, and so we're looking at these specific choices now, and markers as well. So I think the Prismacolor markers. So these are options that are probably the most readily available around. What you can interchange crayons and different types of the dry media for the oil pastel, so that could relate to that. So hopefully you get a glimpse of how these mediums are used. Now, those of you without a whole lot of art background, I would suggest that you check out past tutorials dealing with the different options of applying these medium. So whatever medium you choose to use, do a little research on that. We have a lot available for past workshops, and also if you go to YouTube and you search for Epling Illustrations, I have a lot of different tutorials on there dealing with specific medium. Okay, so thanks again for participating. So here we go. Let's go ahead and start looking at the choices that we have, some of the choices, not all, for you to choose from for your project. Now we're using ink today. I brought a few examples. Now this is a Sumi ink. It's a Japanese ink. It's sort of thick. I like this ink, but if you use a brush with it or a nib pen, nibs, you dip in the ink over and over. You have to clean it. You have to be aware of that. Speedball is another brand. This is sold just about anywhere. You get office supplies. You can dip your ink into Speedball and use it just as well as the Japanese fancy stuff. Well, there's a ton of other types. This is a Deleter black ink. This came in a set. Ink comes in different types of thickness and grades of color, so that's something you got to be aware of. What I like to do is see what other artists are using. Higgins makes a really nice ink. You get it in various colors. This is a brown, and you know, you can play around with the colors. This is the color here of this ink, and you can use different inks to do different types of cartoons and characters using various styles, such as Bill Watterson. Now the cool thing about it is they also make white ink. You might say, well, why in the world do you need white ink for? Well, this is great for whenever you make mistakes with ink, because you can't erase ink, right? But if you can't get any of the fancy stuff, this is what I like to use. A little bit of white out. That covers most of your mistakes wonderfully well. In fact, it looks like I've even used black over the white out there a little bit. Don't know how that happened, but it does. Now, one more little tip is, if you have a contact lens case you're not using, you can fill this up with ink, put the lid on, and you can take it with you wherever you go. You can bring your nib along or your brush, and you can pull ink from there and sketch on the road or on the go. It's a wonderful little bit of a tip to use if you're interested. You know, everybody mostly has access to a case for contact lens, so there you go. So the tools I'm using today, it's going to be a nib. This is a nib. That's what we mean by a nib. It's the metal part. This is the nib holder, which is wooden. They use these a lot in calligraphy, so you can get drawing nibs as well. We're also going to be using this brush pen. All it is a simple brush, but it has an ink reservoir in here, so you have to refill it. You don't have to keep continuously dipping it over and over. Now if you like brush pens, and that's what Watterson used, was a typical brush. He used a sable brush. I think it's a Winsor Newton maybe or something, but there's different sizes of brushes. That's something you have to be careful for. But if you want to purchase one of these pens that you refill, it's a brush pen. I noticed that some brands, such as this one, is a little more thick tip than the red pen here. And as for the brands, this is Pentel, and I think this is Kiriaki. or Kuretake. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it right offhand, but that's the brand names. You have to be careful though, because I purchased this giant massive brush pen at one point thinking it was a great idea, but you can see the tip is massive. So this is great for coloring in large sections of black, but if you're going to draw on a small scale, you have to be careful. We're also going to be using a Faber-Castell. This is an artist pen. It's called a warm gray. It just makes a simple grayish tone, so you could put a little bit of gray into your drawing. And then we're also going to be using a water pen for a little bit of watercolor to put on our rooster at the end. So that's our tools we're using. So in this particular segment, this is dealing with inking. Now, I'm using a brush to ink the Batman and Robin that you're seeing, and the small little kit that you see with the ink in it, that's actually a contact lens case. So when I'm conducting these workshops for Pike TV, it's a local access television show, I bring in different choices of media to show. Ink is a very fun media to use. I like to work in it. Of course, it's all about planning, so you need to pencil in everything and know exactly where you're going to ink before you start. Heavy shadows is wonderful. You could cross-hatch with ink, or you can lay down heavy blocks. There's also different ways to get effects with shadowing if you dilute it with water. So ink is a great, fun medium to use. Now what you're seeing here is a speed drawing. I'm actually inking over top of what I've already drawn out and laid out for our room exercise. All of that you see surrounding my palette, my table there, is actually oil pastels. So I have those spread out. And now laying down oil with oil pastels, a lot of artists use it in different ways. I like to actually use my finger or some sort of a smudge stick. So this is basically what we have now. I put this together sort of quickly in order to show pastels almost look very cartoony. You can get those effect from it, which I love. If you're a fan of Van Gogh, or if you're a fan of artists that used a lot of thick paint and a lot of movement, I like oil pastels for that reason. So what I've done is basically I've went over and I've applied just a light color effect with using pastels to show you how the light would be affected by perspective too. Now, if you notice, I use my finger a lot to put in these shadows. So even like with this effect here on the back side of the chair. And this is really what I wanted to focus on here towards the end. I'd like to do a video just about the application of oil pastels down the road. I think that would be really good. Maybe just bring in a drawing and I can show you how to color that. It's a drawing that's already ready to go, ready to be colored. Even maybe go as far as to have it available where you could go and print the drawing off of your computer at home, so we can have that link set up so that you just go to my website or Pike TV's website or something and print off the drawing that we're going to be using for the color. We may set something up like that. So basically what we see here is all these lines of perspective. Now I've thrown this together. I had to do this fairly quickly, so that's why it looks a little sloppy to me, and it is, but I did that for a reason, to see the application of the color, just a flat surface with shadowing. So the perspective of these windows and how that affects the flooring. So for instance, if you look down at the hardwood floor, all of this area in here, and you see oil pastels when you apply it, when you first put it on, it looks real chalky, okay? But you can blend it. There's rubbing sticks and things that you can get to blend this with. You don't even have to use something. You can blend with the actual oil pastel itself. But the shadow from the light coming in, so our perspective, we would see that the light's coming in from the window, and this portion of the room is going to be brighter than the other portion of the room. I stopped at this point for a reason, because I wanted to show you through applying the rest of this color what I mean by that. Okay, so what I'm going to use a darker brown. I'm actually going to very lightly go over the area that's going to be shadowed. So it's going to be this wall here. Of course, the light's coming in from the windows. Okay, so this wall will be darker. As you move up the wall, though, the light bouncing off of these other objects actually brighten up the room. So we don't want to apply this over the entire wall. We don't want it to be
one big giant dark wall. If we can, we'd like to see just the color actually slowly, gradually change. So you see I'm starting to blend this now, and what I'm doing with this is I'm changing the color of this back wall just a bit, okay? So it actually starts to look, you know, a little darker. I didn't go too far away from this original orangish color because, you know, to do that it would not be the same effect as shadow. You could go a drastic different way with it and use an entirely different opposite hue of this color. That'd be fine to do, but for the purpose of this, I just want to show a gradual change. So you can see that there's a little bit of there's shadow around the top of the wall here, but as we get closer to those windows, it brightens up. Now here's the other point I wanted to make with this, is that the perspective from these windows coming into this room, what does that do exactly for the rest of the objects in the room? I stayed away from using much color on the light fixture here. Mostly we can add a little bit. I want it all to match up around the same hue. I want it to all match as closely as we can. You can imagine there being other candles in the back of this here, so that we have this just to show. But here we go. Now on the window sill, these lines making up the window panels is going to be very dark, okay? And the light coming in then will go through this and pass through these window panes, of course, where this is going to be more shadow than the rest, and we're going to be able to see that effect here in a second. So we're going to go ahead and just smear this a little bit to get some shadow in where this is most predominant, and then what we'll do is we'll come back in, put a little bit of blue outside for the sky. We can see bits of it, just a little bit in areas, not a lot. But then we start to pull this white in. So the light comes in, and you see how this works. This resemble beams of light coming into the room here, and through the window into the room. And what it does is it shows us basically with these lines, you know, where the perspective is coming in from. This has been the point the entire drawing, is to show you how these lines interact with one another. Now, oil pastels may not be your choice for coloring. They're very touchy to use. If you get in a rush with it, like I have a little bit with here, you know, the desired effect may or may not come.
Watercolor palette here. We're going to set it off to the side a little bit, and we're going to start pulling color. Now this holds water down in the reservoir, so you could pull from this and start putting color on. Now I'm going to test the color out over here to the side a little bit, just to see what it's going to look like before I start putting it on the paper. This isn't watercolor paper. It's, you know, obviously it's best to use watercolor paper, but sometimes I like to use regular you know, sheet drawing paper to color on, just because it gives an interesting look to how the color dries. I don't know what it is about it. I like it. I had a sketchbook that I filled up with color, but it wasn't watercolor paper, but I just loved the way that it looked. So we got a little bit of color on the tail. Now we're going to maybe put some color down here on his pants or his shorts. I'm not really sure what those are. But you see how the gray that I put down first now stays underneath the colors that I'm adding, which is what I wanted to happen. I'm very lightly putting on color. I'm not trying to put too much on. I'm adding color to different parts of the picture. So let's say I pull this green up and I let a little bit down here on the shirt. I take a little more green and I slap it up on the tail. I think it's good to spread color out so that you see, even though the pants are supposed to be blue, you see a little bit of that green in the pants somewhere. And I think that's a good idea to do that. It makes when you look at whatever it is you're looking at or you've created, and you see that color spread out throughout in various places, it draws your eye to those areas, and it makes it so not one area is too thick. Okay, so what we're going to do now is put a little bit of brown in there. The rooster he's going to be primarily this color, but we're not going to stick to that totally. Of course, the wing will be a little lighter, and pull some more color up onto his face. This will be a little darker underneath his beak there. And once we have the light brown put down, we're going to pull a little bit more color out and start adding to the tail. You can see how the watercolor blends. It looks really good, I think. on regular drawing paper. This is about the thickness. It's a little heavier than a copying paper like you use in a copy machine. It's a little thicker than that. So that's pretty good for the tail. And we can add a little more green now to the shirt. We're using colors that complement each other, of course, and so we're trying to make it a bright, nice, colorful character. Why I put a chicken leg on his shirt, I don't know. Notice I'm not using a ton of color either. I'm not coloring in every little part of this. I'm leaving some parts white. Leaving that white really separates the colors well, and it also adds a certain effect to the drawing, like there's more light coming in somewhere or something. But you know, you don't have to do that. If you want to color everything in, you know, it's completely up to you, right? So we're going to put a little more dark in his tail up here, like this. I'm going to blend that in a little bit more. Roosters have very colorful tails, so the more color that you can add and get into it, the better. So now we have primarily everything we need to go ahead now and finish out in this brown color. Notice I'm testing out my colors over here before I start putting them down. I do that just to make sure, you know, I'm on the right track with things. I'm not pulling too much color out. It's not, you know, it's going to blend okay, those sorts of things. So I like to see what it's going to look like before I put it down most of the time. So I'll put a little more brown in the back of his tail coming out this way now, adding to it, separating the wings, fingers of on his wing, I should say, I guess. Now we're going to go ahead and pull a little bit more of that color we used earlier down on the legs. See, I'm just putting it on there lightly. I'm not overthinking it. I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to build a masterpiece here. I'm just a simple little cartoon, right? So we've got pretty much everything we need here. We can add a little bit more to the chicken leg, a little brown in there, and down this way, and maybe a little more at the top for his beak here. And then of course the crown is this deep color, and what we're going to do is add to that now. So here's what we've got. We've got our little rooster. He's all set up, he's good to go, and we finished it up. So we're really pleased with how it looks. I hope you've had a great time, and there we go. We have just designed and created our very own rooster.
Now before we start adding any of these markers, the art pens. Now if you don't have any of these at home, you can use, if you have ink, you can put a little bit of water in the ink, it'll work well. But these come in these series of percentages, and if you looked really close on here, you could see 40%, 30%, this is 50%. What that means is the higher up in percentage you go, the more ink that's in this pen, so the darker it's going to be. The hue is going to be closer to black, the higher the percentage of the pen, okay? So I've got a few of these out here I'm going to use in a second. But first, I'm going to speed ink through this. So what this means is I'm going to ink the lines that I have already on the paper with a pen. So if you're at home and you're following along, take your pen and ink all your pencil lines. Trace over your pencil lines with me right now, okay? Then we're going to stop and we're going to put some of this onto the page using these art pens. So let's go ahead and get started with inking our drawing. Okay, so hopefully you've inked along with me at home. You have all your lines traced in. Now I did leave out something from my original, which are these buildings in the background, but that's okay. We're going to focus just on applying these art pens to our piece right now, okay? I have enough material here to do that in. Now I'm going to start out with a low percentage. So I'm actually looking for a maybe, let's see what a 10% looks like. So this is a 10% marker, and you can see here, based on this, you hardly can see a 10%. It's almost like putting nothing on there at all, right? But then when we jump up though, if we jump up a little bit here to like a 40%, you're going to see a much different take on it. You can start to see this now a little bit more. Well, maybe we try this one. I think that one's probably out. Here's a 40%. Here we go. So you can start to see now the color or the hue of this gray, you can see it more, right? So if we put this on the arms here, coming up the side, you can see how that starts to look like shading. Now these pins are really neat in the sense that they blend really well on top of themselves. So if I make this line coming up and down the side of this monster here, when I go back in a minute and put more of the same gray or a different percentage, it's going to blend really well. You notice how I'm going now over top of certain areas, leaving other areas blank or without color or white, okay? And I'm doing that because a little bit later on, I'm going to put either a darker or lighter hue of this color on here, right? So I'm going over, just basically going over certain areas of the drawing right now, not all the areas. And I missed one little line here. I'll go ahead and put this in of his arm. There we go. So you can see how this works. Now, if a movie theater is a bright screen, okay, we know that, then all the light is going to be coming out towards the people. So that means the backs of the people's heads are going to be darker than the front, right? So we can start to put in a little more hue of this color towards the backs of folks' heads here. So you notice now that as I go towards the front of the drawing, I'm not putting any hue. I'm just drawing in the back. And this is actually going to be darkened in even more in a second. One thing about tracing in a pen though, and you can see what's happening here a little bit, whenever I start to color over top of some of these areas, the pen is actually blending in, it's smearing, because the pen is, of course, the ink is wet, and now we're putting something else that's wet on top of it, and you can see what kind of happens. If we jump up to a 50% now, we can start to see a significant difference in this hue. And as I get out towards the borders of where I applied the 40%, I'm going to start to not put any hue down. And this really helps to give the effect that the light is coming from the front and towards the backs of the head. So in the back here, put more than the front. These art pens are really helpful, and I wanted to show this today because we've talked a lot about color, and we talked a lot about how color works whenever you use hues of certain colors. But what happens when you just use gray? Gray is a color. Yeah, it's black and white. It's not, as flashy as the one I showed you at the beginning that I did with all the different colors. But it does give a certain effect that I think is really nice to a drawing whenever you just use a certain shade of gray. Now I'm going over towards the backs here. Notice that I'm staying away from the front, and I'm just putting color as I go, really loose. Okay, I'm not trying to be really technical with this. I'm just having fun putting splotches of color where I think it would be. All right, now inside of the monster's mouth, of course, this is going to be darker. We may even make it even more dark. But now, once I have this line, I can go back over where I've put the color, and I can add more to it. And that's what I'm doing now, okay? I'm going back over top of the gray, over top of the 40%, even in areas where I'm not, I didn't put any of the 40%. And I want to use this sparingly because this is actually going to be colored over more in a little bit. We'll try to get all this in time. We covered sort of a lot here today, but I think it's good to see how these colors are used, right? And you could go in, now the light's coming out, of course, so you could put in some shading in between the folds of the fabric here. If I took my time with this and colored in each little step solidly, not just sort of scratching it on, you could see how this would blend a lot better. But for time purposes, I'm just wanting to get this finished at least so you could see. Now notice I'm still using this little scratchy method, and I'm going over the back here to the debris and just trying to get that filled in over top where the shadows would be. And then also inside the mouth, of course, here in a second, and around their heads. Now this is a 50%, and what I'm going to do now is jump up even higher than that. I think I'm going to go up to, this is a 80% now, right? And for the 80%, this is going to look almost black, I think. Yeah, it does look almost black. But if you can see this in person, you'd be able to tell that this is actually gray, right? So we're going to color around the heads here where the main part of the screen is, getting all that filled in. Now at home, if you have markers at home, what you could do to get this effect, pick one or two or three colors that are similar to one another. So shades of blue, you could do this in shades of blue, green, whatever color you want. But remember that you have to do it in the same color to get the effect. So it's hues, right? So you're selecting certain colors that are of the same, on the color chart of the same color, but different hues, okay? So we've got this darkened in now towards the bottom. You can see how that's starting to pop out more, right? You can actually see how the light resembles that there's light coming in. So, you know, if we continued, if we had more time, we'd finish this up with these markers. I love using these markers. They work really well, and you know, they're fun to play around with to see what sort of effects you can get.